to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a short story because it is Short Story Tuesday, and this is a short story about an unusual drawing in a small town. I am referring to The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. This is a short story that was published in 1948 in The New Yorker, which drew quite a bit of controversy, and I'll explain why later. But for those who don't know, Shirley Jackson is a much acclaimed horror and mystery author. She is known for writing books and short stories, and those books include We Have Always Lived in the Castle and The Haunting of Hill House, which were later turned into pretty successful Netflix shows. I particularly enjoyed The Haunting of Hill House because it felt like really powerful horror and what horror should be. Which is, scary, but also meaningful. And like sometimes I feel like horror doesn't try enough to be those things. But anyways, Shirley Jackson was a bit of a not a larger than life figure. She was kind of shy and reserved. And she was often, pushed around by her husband, who controlled her finances, even though she made far more than he did. And she was what some people have said to be a very successful writer. And there are a lot of writers who have viewed her as an inspiration, including Stephen King and Neil Gaiman, which reading Neil Gaiman, I can definitely see the inspiration there. There's a lot from Shirley Jackson that I haven't read before. And so I do think that this is a good place to start, and I hope to read much more of her writing in 2022. So that's going to be added to the list of things I have to read in 2022. But without further ado, let's talk about this controversial and pretty amazing short story. I will do a summary, a brief analysis, and we will move on from there. So The Lottery focuses on an unnamed small town with several close-knit families. At the start of the story, they are all joking around and heading for the town square. First, the children show up, and then the men and the women begin to show up for a ritualistic, mysterious drawing that appears to happen once a year. Although this appears to happen in other towns, there is a rumor that many of the other towns are considering dropping the drawing, although we don't know what the purpose of the drawing is at the beginning of the story. Every person in the crowd draws from the mysterious box, and it turns out that the Hutchinson family actually drew the piece of paper that says that they were chosen for something. This results in a little bit of tension popping up, as some people claim that this wasn't a fair drawing, and other people saying that they knew what they were getting into because this happens every year. And Tessie Hutchinson just claims that it's not fair and that nobody needs to continue doing this, but what they're doing, it doesn't sound good, but we don't quite know what's happening. So there's a second drawing where everyone in the Hutchinson family has to pull into a box, and whoever is selected, that means they're chosen for some particular thing. Tessie Hutchinson ends up pulling out the piece of paper that says she is chosen, and she begins walking towards a specific area in the square where she is still going off about how this is unfair and nobody needs to do anything. Everyone then proceeds to grab rocks and proceeds to stone her to death, and that's where the story ends, and that horrifying and terrifying, note right there. In terms of analysis, this is one of the shorter short stories that I have read. Not too many words, and it was published originally in The New Yorker. But that said, there is still a whole mess of things worth talking about in this fascinating story. One thing that comes to mind right away as I was reading this is that of tradition. A lot of the characters are noting how this happens every year, and every town must participate in this for reasons that aren't quite clear, and this has apparently been going on for quite some time. There's a man named Old Man Warner who has said that this has to happen, and he's not talking about the origins of it, so presumably this has gone on for longer than he's been alive. So it's clear that this is happening for a specific reason, an unknown reason, and it's ingrained in this society. And apparently it's necessary for some specific reason that Old Man Warner doesn't quite elaborate on. Allow me to read you a quote from this. Old Man Warner snorted. "Pack of crazy fools," he said. "Listening to the young folks, nothing's good enough for them. Next thing you know, they'll be wanting to go back to living in caves. Nobody work anymore. Live that way for a while. Used to be a saying about lottery in June, corn be heavy soon. First thing you know, we'd all be eating stewed chickweed and acorns. There's always been a lottery," he added petulantly. Bad enough to see young Joe Summers up there joking with everybody. And right there, you really get an understanding of how long this lottery's been going on, but also how it seems to be necessary. Like Old Man Warner says, this is somehow associated with the corn harvest or a working society. So according to Old Man Warner, like the lottery is necessary for something beneficial to happen to society. But it's kind of contradictory because other people have said that many cities are giving it up. And so if they're willing to give it up, clearly it doesn't have that like necessary function in a society, that there's nothing keeping society from collapsing here. You're getting a little like mixed messaging about how important this is. And to add further than that, Jackson notes multiple times throughout the story that the original meaning of the lottery has been forgotten. They're not using the original box anymore, and many people can't even tell you why it's happening. They just show up on a yearly basis to participate in this lottery where people die. And people say it's necessary, but nobody can tell you why it's necessary. And it makes me think, like, perhaps Jackson's intention was to draw comparisons to the real world. What do we say is necessary for society to function, but doesn't actually produce any good, or like is only happening because people continue to allow it to happen? I think of the American healthcare system, the American judicial system, the constant war machine that we see in many other countries that is paired with American imperialism. Like, people say that this needs to happen in order to create a good and healthy society, but does it? And like, what happens if we stop? Like, if we decide to go with another medical system that makes sure that people have what they need, is that really going to cause society to collapse? Why are we doing things this certain way? I think Jackson rightfully points out, like, there is no reason to do things this certain way, especially if it's horrifying. And often it's the case that we just let these terrifying, saddening, destructive systems go on without anyone stopping them, because that's how they were before. And, you know, if it's not hurting the right kind of people, then there's no reason to stop it. But another more interesting thing about this story is the ultimate question that it brings up. And that is, how does a society just go back to normal after witnessing the lottery each year? Because we're told in the story that this happens on a yearly basis for countless number of years. That means families have been torn apart because someone died. And like, how does a society go back to normal after watching like your mother be stoned to death by everyone in the town? Like, how is that normal? How do you justify even talking with people? At the beginning of the story, people are joking with one another. They're very jovial, making jokes, and it seems like, you know, this town is well functioning. There's no problems in it. But if you look at the ending and how they just proceed to just jump and stone Tessie Hutchinson to death, like, how does that that really work. It's terrifying to know that at any given time, any one of your townspeople will kill you because a ritual says that this has to be done. It really makes me think about how maybe Jackson was getting at like the normalization of sacrifice, or the normalization of violence towards your neighbors, of maybe the problems with not asking questions when an authority figure instructs you to do something, and the effects that it could have. Like this was written in 1948. If you recall, like 3 years prior, the Holocaust was coming to an end, and I don't think the news or the widespread awareness of what happened in the Holocaust was present in 1948. But it's fair to say that Jackson might have heard something about it, that people might have known that there was this pattern of the Nazi authority figures telling the grunts to do this terrifying work, and they were just doing it because someone said this had to be this way. And so this is what happens when authority has too much control over the individual, and as a result you end up with killing your own neighbors because it's ordained by some ritual that you could very well stop, but someone has told you that it must go on. And I can very well see how this would lead to so much controversy. When this was released in the New Yorker, people lost their shit. They unsubscribed to the New Yorker, and Shirley Jackson was yelled at by people. The Union of South Africa, one of the predecessors to the current South African government, was just like, nope, we're banning this. And so many other high schools and communities have banned this specific short story, largely in part because it tells an uncomfortable truth that we have blood on our hands, and when we allow these terrifying systems to just continue because simply it's a ritual. It's something that we've never bothered to question before, and it's something that we just let go on because if it's here, it must be working. It must be doing some function, and according to Shirley Jackson, like, we need to wake up and realize that it doesn't have a good function, and we have to call out these weird systems that cause more destruction than they do help. So a lot to think about with this short story. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. A pretty good and horrifying short story as you get to the end, and it's just like all these people who are joking with one another just pounce on Tessie Hutchinson and kill someone who they proclaim to like at the beginning of the story. I definitely recommend that you go out and read it. I'm going to put a link to the New Yorker article in the description. Read it. Tell me what your thoughts were. I'd love to have a conversation with you in the comments. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this short story if they don't already know. And I feel like this is one of the more famous ones. It keeps getting recommended to me, and so I finally decided to read it. And other than that, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and randomly drawn travels. Farewell.